Jeg har været i England til symposium. Der mødte jeg Roger, som jeg blev gode venner med. Roger er idealist, som har arbejdet med venstrefløjsemner hele livet. Som en ægte, engageret, radikal stemme for de fattige. Vi snakker om de udfordringer, som venstrefløjen har i disse dage med woke, cancel culture, og hvor grænserne går for de måder, vi udfolder os på. For hvor går grænserne?
Roger, we're here in this beautiful place in Queen's College. We just finished the second day of the symposium, and you had this amazing performance where you told a lot about how you do social work here in England. And I did my presentation on woke yesterday, and the aim of this little discussion is, trying to understand woke. Where are the limits? I think we are very much in the same boat. We agree on most things. We are kind of liberal, but also have a conservative bent also. From this perspective, what does woke really look like? And first of all, you said that you have been agreeing with a lot of the points of woke. What are these points?
Well, interestingly, the presentation I gave this morning was triggered by a paper from a friend of mine, Dr. Timothy Stacey, who lectures in the University of Utrecht. And the reason I mention this is that he wrote me an email after I'd done some work on a journal I edit, and said, "I really like your work, Roger. You are so woke." So for my first introduction to understanding what it means to be woke was it means you are making a really positive, radical contribution to society. The difficulty becomes, I think, and we both recognise this, where somehow the spirit with which we introduce, if you like, our radical thinking or our alternative views, especially when they begin to become more mainstream, when a lot of people like it, is the spirit that you were originally kind of reacting to when you were wanting to create open space for transgender people to feel welcome or something. It actually somehow turns into this into the same spirit as the one that you were reacting to. So then you find the woke people are like the new neo-legalists who are, rather than creating new space for people to operate, are actually cancelling people's space. And that, I think, is what we're really wanting to investigate at the moment and see what can be done about that.
Yes, because my point was also that, as a humanist, right, one of the basic principles of humanism is truth, right? That we are allowed and able to talk about everything, even those things that are unwelcome, right? And I truly believe that's my point in criticizing woke, is that if you lose the ability to speak freely, you also lose a part of your humanism.
Yes.
And I think this free speech discussion, it is quite vital to the criticism against woke, right? The minute that you think that you can cancel other people, that you can say that you're not supposed to do this and that, then at least for me, you go against the basic principle of humanism. Enlightenment is about truth and Rowan Atkinson, right? Maybe he's annoying. Maybe he's a bit funny also, right? But he's allowed to say the things that he wants to say, right? Because maybe there's a truth in it.
Yes. Yeah, I think I just keep coming back to this question of the heart or the spirit. So I wouldn't describe myself as a humanist, probably, because I'm coming very much from a kind of committed Christian background. But on the other hand, I would say that a Christianity that is not for humans, that is not pro-human being, is a negative Christianity and not really worthy of the name, I guess. Although, again, what you can't start doing is reacting to those Christians or those non-humanists who want to take the ground from under your feet. So I think, I guess it's love that I like to talk about, which can't be talked about without definition. But I want to know, yes, that that even if someone disagrees with me, they do love me, or at least honour or appreciate or recognise I have a right to my opinions. And I think that's where, if you take something like critical race theory, for example, in the States, the wokeness of critical race theory meant that people who didn't agree with critical race theory might not be allowed to speak at your university. However, what's happening now is, in a great chunk of universities in the States, and in particular parts of the States where you would expect this maybe to happen, actually the very books that are written about critical race theory are being removed from the libraries, and children's books that suggest a kind of a leaning towards the black situation are being regarded as critical race theory, and the kids are not allowed to read them anymore. So it's it's craziness, isn't it, when this starts to happen? So for me, it's more a question of what is going on at the gut level of a human being. And if we can approach one another like it's an adventure, what do you think about that? Then if that approach to life is woke, I'm for that.
Yeah, so this essential coming from the heart, or coming from somewhere where you can recognize yourself as a human being, but also other people as human beings, even though they can be evil, as you see them as evil. I think it's a very basic principle that's important. It's a good place to start, right?
Yes.
In Denmark, we have had this. It's also something which kind of put me on the foot on the path of understanding that something's wrong, right? We have these these people who produces fur out of little animal called a mink, and all they do is that they produce this animal, and they don't really use it for anything else. And it's, to be honest, it's not good for the animal, right? Why are we producing animals just for fur? And then, we can discuss it, right? So we from the left, we wanted to shut it down, but the way they did it was by gunpoint and with the police, right? Shutting people's businesses down. And I think, for me, that touched a place in me. I said, well, this is not right, right? Maybe this farmer who's doing things that they're hurting to the animal, doing something wrong. But to shut him down like that, I think that's really callous.
Yes.
And I think if we in our attempt to change the world, go to a place where we accept some of the methods that we originally rebelled against, then we are stepping in that direction, which is really dangerous, because then we become the new emperors and the new oppressors, right?
Yes. No, I agree with you. I'm a bit like a broken record because I keep coming back to the internal. But I do think that in this whole discussion about woke, because we had this discussion yesterday, if you remember, when you gave your presentation, I came across quite strongly when you used the example, which you thought was going too far, of pulling down statues of people that you disagree with what they did, And then we realised that all that we were differing about was where we drew our particular line. And I think this question of where we cross a line is often when the issue that we are dealing with is becoming something to do with our identity. It gets called identity politics, doesn't it? That actually, particularly in the West at the moment, rather than there being broadly common agreement. Zygmunt Bauman, the sociologist, talks about this. The late Zygmunt Bauman died a couple of years ago. But recognizing what starts to happen is when we lose a sense of community and belonging, then we don't feel that we are in community or belong. And then issues, which are important issues, instead of there being something we see, yes, how can we help the community to deal with these issues? It becomes, this is the issue that now is my identity. This and everything is about this. And suddenly the question of the mink, what happens to the mink, becomes like a question of what's happening to me. And I think that there is a really important discussion, just to be really controversial here, to be had on issues like fur, let's say. Now, of course, if we're basically breeding animals in appalling conditions for nothing other than to kill them in appalling conditions to make money out of their skins, put like that, anyone can say there's something wrong with this. Then you take another issue that's really important to people is the survival of different species that we're losing. Like, I think in the last 10 years, 300 species in the UK alone or something have become extinct. Now, there is a sort of meeting point between, okay, right, that we don't treat animals appallingly in order to make money out of their skins. Thus far, actually, I've not heard so much strong argument about leather jackets. Fur coats, yes, but leather jackets people still seem to wear. But my point is that if we get to the issue that we say we should not have animal husbandry for the benefit of human beings, then we may find ourselves not working to the benefit of the animals either, because what's the purpose of them? And actually the fact of the matter is, if you just leave certainly some animals breeds, certainly those that became domesticated, just to their own devices, they're as likely to die out unless, of course, we then care about them. But one way of caring about them might be to think of how can we humanely encourage their growth and use their skins.
Yeah, I think there was another lady who talked about empathy. I think empathy is a good principle, essentially, right? And the point about empathy is trying to understand the pain and also the good points and feelings in other people, in other animals, in nature as such, right? And I think, at least from my experience, that if we empathize with different peoples, even though we think they're evil, right, we may find there is a balance to things. And I think what is really important, and what I've been working on in Denmark, is to try to find a solution that really takes in tries to minimize the suffering of everybody. There's not a good example that I know that we pretty much agree upon. You come from North England, right?
Yes.
You're actually the working class.
Yes.
Originally.
Yeah, but I'm original working class from London.
Okay.
But I live in the north of England,
okay, so
and I've spent a lot of my life there.
You're an East Ender, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, a little tiny bit further out. It's the southwest of London.
Yeah.
You notice that my name is Roger Haydon Mitchell, which sounds quite posh, Haydon.
Yeah.
But actually, Haydon is the name of a road, Haydon's Road, Wimbledon. And Haydon's Road in Wimbledon, certainly when my family grew up there, was one of the poorest parts of Wimbledon. And my parents, went to school with no shoes on their feet.
So you can really empathize with it to be a working class.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
I'm working class.
And one of the things and issues that I think is really important also in this whole discussion about green change and everything is that not to forget the working people, right? And it's again about empathy, right? Because I think the left wing has, in their fascination of being green, right? Maybe they have forgotten that a part of being liberal is also being a working class. And the solutions that we should find, I think, to the green change is something that would recognize also the workers. And if we just go on and try to save all the animals, forgetting that, there's a smith there who needs a job, right?
Yes.
He needs to go back and forth from his house to his job, right? And maybe he can't afford an electric car.
Yes.
And maybe he lives in a small apartment. He can't have a electric car because it doesn't work if you live in an apartment. I think we are losing and we're also sacrificing a part of the liberal constituency. I think that's doesn't. It's a lack of empathy, essentially.
Really interesting, and it maybe we've just touched there on something that's slightly different in the socio-political makeup of Denmark and the UK. I don't know for sure, but certainly in this country you can't put green and the left together. So in this country there's definitely a green movement, and many left-wing people don't agree with that movement.
Okay, yeah.
So, and it would be fair to say, I think it's a fairly liberal movement. It's very, very strongly backed by the rising generation, which is great, from my perspective, really great news. But I'm still with your point about working people, and particularly the poorer of the working people. You know, if you are kind of more like upper working, lower middle, or however the class system works in Denmark, then you can probably afford the luxury of making sure that your house is properly insulated and things like that, and that you sort out your rubbish properly, and that you recycle. If you are actually struggling to survive at all, and many of the people I work with really, really are, they just one small change, and they are now making a decision between heat and food, and this is really real right now with the energy rising costs.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
So I would say that the question of trying to crunch the issue that whatever the change is, the poorest always suffer, is really one of the biggest questions of the West, and what is undermining the West increasingly, particularly if you look at the States, certainly the UK, for want of a better word, the kind of the underclass, the grassroots underclass, are getting poorer and poorer, and the tiny 0.5% at the top are getting richer and richer and richer, and that has got to be crunched.
It is a great problem. From a humane perspective, it's a great problem because people who are poor, they suffer a lot. But it's also seen from a point of stability in the society, a great problem, because the more poor you have, you end up with the revolutions and things that will change the society, not always for the better, right?
For sure.
You can see that in the COVID-19, there was a huge uprising in Denmark. And some of it was, I sympathize, I gave them time in the television, but there was some of them were openly anti-Semitic, right?
Yes.
And so if you really change this whole society, I mean, sometimes you put up, and there's a lot of, things can change, and sometimes it's like, you can see, this is not to compare the COVID-19, but in Germany, before the Nazi regime, they had the same problems, right? They had no money, they were suffering, and they ended up being all Nazis, right?
Yeah.
So you never know. But in France, they had the French Revolution and so on and so forth. But the stability of society requires that people are not suffering too much. So, but I really do empathize with the point about people. You work. Maybe you should talk a little about your grassroots work.
On the way to talking about that, I guess what I'm really getting at is, if society is alienating, the system that we have and the structures and infrastructures we have are clearly alienating. By that I mean not meeting the good and the need of a substantial part of society. And by substantial, it doesn't have to be anything like a majority, but if a significant minority are being alienated, then in the end that becomes a sore, and there will be a reaction, and they can very, very easily become prey to kind of crazy perspectives, because virtually any perspective that can challenge the main the kind of the status quo in its oppressiveness becomes welcome. One becomes prey to it.
Yeah, that's where really all these conspiracy theories comes in and all this. Yeah.
Yes, I think it is.
The queen is a lizard.
Yeah. Yes, you could. In the end, it's extraordinary what you can believe. Because what you're really looking for is a myth or a metaphor that is utterly other to what is mainstream thinking.
Yeah.
But what I've become involved with, particularly since 2016, and then throughout the pandemic and currently, is an initiative that began in Glasgow in Scotland, in one of the poorest areas. But it connects with the truth and justice concern out of South Africa, where the idea was to bring together people, in that case from the racial different sides within apartheid, to try and rebuild a cohesive society. And whatever one's view of current South Africa is, it pretty much had a bloodless revolution, which was, to use the word metaphorically, quite magic. and so what this that I'm now involved in is an attempt to give space and voice and friendship to those most alienated in society, in particular in terms of their experience of poverty, which is many different sorts of people, which I might touch on in a moment, but to then make friends with them and encourage them to tell their stories to one another. Because many people locked in poverty honestly think it's their fault and they're the only ones and there's nothing to be done and that everything's against them. And it feels like that because often it's kind of true. But when you get them to tell their stories to each other and to form a kind of solidarity, and then the magic of this Poverty Truth Commission is you find by having people who do have some sort of relationships with people in power to make the friendships with the poor, then to be able to bring them together. So those telling their stories who with lived experience of poverty, we call them community commissioners. They then say, I would really like such and such a person to listen. I'd like the leader of the council. I'd like the person in charge of housing. I'd like the person in charge of mental health, the National Health Service. I want to talk to them. And the person who does the benefits locally, the DWP, the job centre. And so you bring them together.
That's a brilliant idea.
And they listen to one another's stories. It involves helping them to learn listening skills on both sides, because frankly, often the people in positions of power have no listening skills whatsoever or little chance to use them, because they're often as oppressed by the structures as those who are on the downside of them. So that is very much what I'm spending my time doing these days, and it's been really exciting.
Yeah, it's hard work, right? It is, looking into the poverty and the suffering that is where people are. It plugs on your soul, right?
It does, and it can be soul destroying, to use the phrase. But actually, what I would go so far as to say, these last 5 years, having done many different things with my life. I've been a kind of a radical community activist I've been self-employed in that sort of work since 1974 somehow. So I'm pretty ancient actually. But although there's been moments that have been terrific, both within the kind of the church scene that I've worked in, and then we did an extraordinary amount of travelling the world saying sorry for British colonialism at the invitation of those who had been on the receiving end of it in Africa and in indigenous peoples of America and Australia and New Zealand and so on. It was an extraordinary decade doing that. But even with all of that experience, it's been the actual change, the socio-political change at a local level, which has taken our breath away. It was, we thought it was worth doing. It was worth trying, but in the space of just about 6 brief years, we've seen measurable change at quite significant levels. And there are now poverty truth commissions in about 20 different towns and cities within the UK, and they are all seeing something extremely similar. So there is now a kind of a central poverty truth.
What's going on. Yeah.
Yes, and so all these other things can go on at, if you like, at a more familiar political level of the left and the right, party politics, unions, and so on, all of which have got a contribution to make, for sure. But there is something else going on at grassroots which gives me hope.
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary work, and I think where I really empathize with you is bringing the stories forward, right? Because that's what I've been trying to do with my television station, is that going out and confronting those horrors. That's where I live in northern Jutland. There, I just exposed to ring of pedophiles, right?
Wow.
It's just horrible what's going on there, and also there's the whole system of the handicap. The handicapped. It's also horrible in some of the stories that gets out there. But it's just that the power of the story, right? When you put it on television, or if you put it on most people see it, to be honest, on Facebook and YouTube, when they see and hear what's going on, I mean, that really moves people to try to change the things.
Yes.
And that's where I think, but I also think that I can do only 2 or 3 interviews half a year, right, semester, because I get so depressed and so it's really crushing to hear these stories, and it's so in a way it's a sacrifice, right, to go out there and giving them that voice and giving them the opportunity to tell what's going on. But it's true that the change you can actually do in society it's huge, right?
It is huge.
It is. Just bring the stories up.
It does. And I'm just reflecting on what you just mentioned, the ring that you've been having to expose. And while I think that it does indicate, if you like, there is real evil, I would say 2 things about it. One is we still have to love those people as people, and that's a hard thing to do when we're uncovering real evil. But also I think that a great deal of what we think of as evil has got some other reason behind it, where often childhood trauma, often, again, what we've already talked about, people being alienated from society. Quite often it's been the ideological teachings of different social groups and political groups and religious groups that have then caused some of these things to take place.
I know that you can say that there are social reasons why you do things, but there is also just like this poor handicapped girl. She was taken away from her mother. She was not supposed to be taken away, and the system just kept her. And she was she was raped each day, for 10 years, and then she got into the clutches of this, just a scumbag, right?
Yeah.
And he called the mother of this poor handicapped child with his friends just to listen to the screams of this girl, and I think yes, you can excuse it. And I'm still in the process of trying to understand it.
I don't want to excuse it. I think evil is evil. There is real,
it's
unadulterated evil, and people do it, and we cannot allow it. Is one of the reasons why, although I'm not someone who is a friend of prisons, in the final analysis, some people have got to be removed from society. But what I would plead for is that we deal with that part of us which is so common to a great deal of the kind of archetypical American, and I'm not anti-American, but a particular kind of American film where justice and retribution are compacted together. And so, as far as I can see, removing people from the opportunity to continue to do the evil they do is necessary, but then violent retribution towards them, whereas we've somehow restorative justice has got to be what our legal systems are based on. So all I was getting at there was not at all to suggest there's any excuse for the behaviour of those that you're exposing, but to recognise that in the final analysis, there are so few things that we all agree are evil anymore. The scumbags, as you call it, who actually do that kind of evil, the chances of them ever finding mercy or restoration from it become almost completely impossible. And I think once we're in a society where that happens, where we have no love for our enemies or those who do true evil, it becomes a society which in the end is not a wholesome society.
I agree. It's not I'm saying that we should hate this guy. What we should do is try to restore the system, right?
Yes.
Because I mean, this happened on a public institution.
Outrageous.
So my point was not to put him. He should probably be put in prison, but that's not really my point.
Oh, he should be put in prison.
He should be put. Yeah. He should be put in prison.
We agree here.
Yeah, we agree.
It's what happens afterwards that's the point.
Yeah, but what we also should do is to change the system, because how can this happen, right?
Yeah.
How can this happen in a public-run institution that's supposed to take care of the weakest persons in our society, and then just expose her for this awful torture? I'm still trying to understand what was going on, and it's just it's mind-shattering, right? To see this happening.
Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts about that, but we could talk forever.
Yeah, it's almost half an hour, and I think. Do you have any any comments to Denmark?
Well, I absolutely love Borgen. I don't know how much reality that's giving us on our insight into Denmark, but yes. I think what I would want to say is that the Scandinavian countries in general, and Denmark in particular, I believe have a really important contribution to make within the world as a whole, and Europe in particular. We haven't talked about Brexit here. I'm one of those people who, for many, many years, if I was asked who I am, I'm first of all European, secondly British, thirdly English. And so I didn't just feel, I actually was disenfranchised by Brexit, and that was a huge problem. And I represent many, many people in the UK who feel like we belonged together in a way that our government decided we no longer could. We would love to think it would be possible, at least individually, that we could belong to the European Union. Pay a fee and vote to be part of it. At the moment, that's not possible. No. But the reason I'm saying this is that many of us feel a complete relational unity, and we look to somewhere like Denmark with the relatively small size, but the extraordinary gifts that are vested in the Danish people to show us the way on some of these issues. And so it's why it's been so good to meet you, Asger.
And you too. I think it's really, really amazing to meet a person who's really doing these things. And many academics they just talk about it, right? But actually going out and doing the work as you do with your commission, Truth and
Poverty Truth Commission.
I really respect it. I think it's a great example of doing the actual work, right? And not just talking about it. So that was so inspiring, and then I hope that I really hope you.
Well, the feeling was mutual, so it's been very good to spend this time together. I hope that your viewers will enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely will. Thanks.